The grainy black and white security footage captured at exactly 3:17 in the morning on a bitter winter Tuesday shows a sight that the shelter staff will never forget. A man wrapped in a threadbare coat that offered little protection against the biting wind stood before the iron gates of the city animal rescue. In his arms he clutched a shivering dog as if his very life depended on the animal's warmth. For nearly 10 minutes he did not move, his face buried in the dog's fur in a final, agonizing embrace. When he finally walked away into the darkness, he left behind only high things. His only companion in this world and a crumpled, handwritten letter, its ink blurred by the unmistakable stains of fresh tears. This was not a story of cold abandonment, but a desperate act of the purest sacrifice. What the volunteers discovered in that letter, and the miracle that would follow days later in a nearby park, would challenge everything we think we know about the true cost of love. Elias was a man the world had stopped looking at years ago. At 65 his skin was a map of harsh winters and forgotten dreams, his hands calloused and permanently stained by the soot of city alleys. He lived in the margins where the only thing cheaper than hope was the cardboard he slept on. But Elias wasn't entirely alone. For 4 years he had shared every scrap of bread and every shivering night with Barnaby, a scruffy loyal terrier mix he'd found abandoned in a dumpster during a summer storm. To Elias, Barnaby wasn't just a pet, he was the only witness to his existence, the only living soul who still looked at him with something other than pity or disgust. They were a team of two against a world that had no room for either of them. However, the recent months had been cruel. Elias's cough had turned into a deep rattling pain in his chest that made every breath a struggle, and the meager coins in his jar were no longer enough to buy even the cheapest kibble. He watched Barnaby's ribs begin to show, watched the once bright spark in the dog's eyes dim as hunger took its toll. The realization hit Elias with a crushing weight that his love was no longer enough to keep Barnaby safe. He was failing the only creature who had never failed him. The decision to take Barnaby to the shelter wasn't born out of a desire to be free but out of a desperate gut-wrenching need to ensure his best friend survived the winter that Elias knew he himself might not. The night before they reached the gate, they sat under the flickering light of a street lamp, Elias whispering apologies into Barnaby's ears while the dog licked away the tears that fell onto his fur. He was preparing to give away his heart so that it could keep beating, a silent choice made in the shadows of a park bench that no one would ever see. Inside the shelter, the world continued its loud and frantic pace, but for Barnaby, time had simply stopped. He sat in the corner of Kennel 14, his gaze fixed unblinkingly on the heavy metal door through which Elias had disappeared. The volunteers brought him premium kibble and fresh water, but the bowls remained untouched. He didn't bark, he didn't whine. He simply existed in a state of quiet, dignified mourning. To the staff, he looked like a dog waiting for a bus that would never arrive, a small, scruffy statue of grief that no amount of kindness could reach. Every time the door creaked open, his ears would twitch for a fraction of a second. His heart leaping before the scent of a stranger would send him back into his silent vigil. For days past, Barnaby had grown thin, his coat losing its luster, his spirit fading. Sarah, a young volunteer who had been haunted by the blurred ink on the man's letter, couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't over. On her lunch break, she walked across the street to the local park, following a hunch she couldn't explain. There, tucked beneath a rusted slide in the far corner, she found him. Elias was curled into a ball, his breathing shallow and ragged, his face pale against the damp earth. He was barely conscious, gripped by the pneumonia he had tried to hide from his dog. As Sarah knelt beside him and called for an ambulance, Elias's hand moved feebly, searching for a phantom presence that was no longer there. The reunion happened 2 hours later, not in a sterile room, but on the sidewalk just outside the park gates as the paramedics prepared to move Elias to the hospital. Sarah had rushed back to the shelter and grabbed Barnaby, sensing that the dog was the only medicine the man truly needed. A passerby, moved by the sight, pulled out their phone to record what happened next. As the ambulance doors opened, Barnaby froze. His nose twitched, catching a familiar scent of tobacco and old wool, a scent that meant home. He let out a sound that wasn't a bark, but a high-pitched, sobbing yelp of recognition. He broke free from the leash and scrambled toward the stretcher. Elias, eyes fluttering open at the sound, reached out his trembling, four-bruised arms. The world around them seemed to dissolve into a blur. There was only the frantic thumping of a tail against metal and the sight of a man sobbing into the fur of the friend he thought he'd lost forever. Barnaby didn't just lick his face. He pressed his forehead against Elias's chest, his small body shaking with the force of his relief. It was a language without words, a conversation between two souls who had stared into the abyss of separation and had been pulled back by the sheer force of their bond. In that moment, the park was no longer a place of cold abandonment, but a sanctuary where a miracle had finally taken root. The video of the reunion, captured by a tearful bystander, exploded across social media within hours. Titled "The Last Sacrifice," it garnered over 15 million views in a single weekend, touching a nerve in a world that often overlooks those living on the streets. The sight of Barnaby's pure, unfiltered joy and Elias's silent, sobbing relief became a symbol of a bond that poverty could not break. But the viral fame was just the beginning of the miracle. A local crowdfunding campaign, started by the very shelter Elias had walked away from, raised enough money to cover his hospital bills and, more importantly, to secure a small, modest apartment for the pair. For the first time in years, Elias has a key in his pocket and a roof that doesn't leak. The handwritten letter "No Nuak Met" that started it all is now framed on his bedside table, a reminder of the night he almost gave up everything to save his best friend. Today, you can find them in the same park where they once struggled to survive. But the scene is entirely different. Elias, now healthier and with a renewed spark in his eyes, sits on a sun-drenched bench while Barnaby, with a shiny new collar and a coat that glows with health, plays nearby. They are no longer the invisible man and the unwanted dog. They are a family, a testament to the community that refused to let them fall. The shelter staff often visit, still marveling at the dog who refused to eat until he found his heartbeat again. A life that was once destined for a cold, lonely end has been completely rewritten, proving that sometimes the world does notice, and sometimes love really is enough to bring us home. We often believe that love is about holding on as tightly as we can, operating under the assumption that to love someone is to keep them by our side at all costs. But Elias and Barnaby have taught us a far more difficult and beautiful truth, that sometimes the ultimate act of love is letting go. In the heavy silence of that 3 a.m. sacrifice, a man who possessed nothing in this world gave away his everything, proving that the heart's true wealth is not found in what we accumulate, but in what we are willing to surrender for the sake of another. Their journey serves as a profound reminder that no matter how broken, invisible, or forgotten we might feel, we are never truly lost as long as we carry the capacity for such selfless devotion. It is a testament to the fact that even in our darkest hours, a single act of sacrifice can ignite a light that leads us all back home. As we conclude this story, let us remember this one simple truth. Love is not measured by what we have, but by what we are willing to lose for the one we love. Thank you for joining us in honoring the depth of the human-animal bond and for standing with us in compassion today. Until next time, may you find the courage to love as deeply and as purely as those who have nothing left but each other.